Right.
here, but it isn't. It was that my heart is not proud.
That's correct. And that's exactly the point, too. It's, and this is the English Standard Version that I'm using. And if you use the King James Version, I like the King James Version because I like a lot of the wording in that. But they're both similar. And that's the NIV?
This is NIV.
Okay. And the New International Version, in this case, has a more accurate translation of a heart not being lifted up. He's not proud. He's not arrogant. He's not thinking more of himself than he should. He's thinking more soberly of himself. Yes, Jimmy?
Yeah, the writer in Proverbs says haughty eyes and pride and arrogance and all that kind of thing is one of the things that God tests in the book of Proverbs.
Exactly right. And we'll see this as being worldly, and this is the way a worldly person would be acting or feeling. This is the posture that a worldly person has, as opposed to someone that is godlike. So, very good point. And if you have translations even different from that, we'll see other descriptions of what he's saying. I am not this way anymore. You know, Israel has had a problem, and the psalmist has had a problem throughout this, as going from a state of, yes, I know there's a God, and God can help me. Please help me, God. But still wanting to do things their way. And now this is part of that ascension in drawing closer to God and being more godlike. And this is really a sort of a turning point, because it's going from external type of things, external enemies, to like we saw in last chapter, chapter 130, which is, well, what's wrong with me? You know, what's wrong in here, in my heart? And that's quite a turning point. But thanks. And let me jump back over here real quick to this and talk about the theme just a moment. And you see it says humble rest and quiet trust. Okay. We've been talking about trusting God. And every time they cry out where they've turned away from God, and then God rescues them for some reason, well, then they begin to trust God. And that's where this is here. This is turning to a trust, quieting their soul. The psalmist is quieting his soul and trusting in God, not trying to push for the way he thinks he should be doing things. Okay, and as far as the pilgrimage goes, where they are in this ascent, they're developing this inner peace that's necessary to enter into God's presence. That's part of that trust. I'm not anxious about things anymore. I'm trusting in God and letting God guide my way in life. Okay, and so it's talking about this at the bottom line there, posture. Before, he had an arrogant posture or a proud posture. This was characterized his soul. Now he's changing to being what would be considered healed, the kind of posture, the kind of attitude that God would have us to have. And that is the attitude or the posture of a person that would be in Christ, in God's presence. The way the high priest would be going into the, not arrogant, but totally dependent and submissive to God, and to make high priest going in to make the sacrifice. Yes.
Isn't it always easier to see someone else's faults than to look at our own?
It is. And we read that where he says, why are you taking the speck out of your neighbor's eye when you've got a beam in your own eye? It's hard for us to see, harder for us to see our own faults. But here the psalmist is looking inside and seeing where he was, and he's decisively changing that. We have a decision to make, you know. The thing that struck me here is he calmed his soul. That was his decision. It's God working in him. You know, we talk about God being spirit, but we try to personify God as this old man living somewhere, you know, but God is spirit. He is all and in all. And God is working in us when we are getting to the point here where the psalmist is talking about he is today. He is now in this passage. So, verse 1, talking about my eyes are not lifted up, or my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. It sounds like they're saying all the same thing, but there's a little difference in each one of these. So this is that inner transformation that's going on with the psalmist here. Last chapter he said, okay, I've had all of this affliction coming from the outside, but now I don't. And I'm still feeling afflicted. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with in here? So these three things, the heart, the eyes, and I'll call it the mind. When he says, I do not occupy myself with things too great, I don't occupy my mind up here. I'm not dwelling upon these things that I can do nothing about, that are too great for me, that so I translate that to mind. Where else do we hear of three things in the New Testament that we should not be involved in? Oh. Pride of life. What is it? Lust of the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. Right? That was the first thing I thought about when I saw this, the heart, eyes, and the mind, because these are three symptoms of a sick soul, so to speak. Not a healed soul, but when you have haughty eyes or a lifted up heart, being proud, being wanting or searching for things, wanting your own way, that kind of thing, then this somewhat relates. So, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life, and we read that in 1 John chapter 2 in verse 16. So that's one of the things we're very familiar with. So everything we read in the New Testament, we read it in the Old Testament. You know, it's like Paul and the other apostles say, we don't speak anything except what we have heard from Moses or the law and in the prophets and in the Psalms. So everything we read in the New Testament, I tell people I want to hear the gospel from the Old Testament. And the way I was taught years and years ago is, the Old Testament doesn't apply to us. We have to rightly divide the truth. We're under the New Testament. That's what applies. And consequently, we never studied the Old Testament. And come to find out, all the same words are there. It's one story. Yeah, Jimmy?
That's what you just mentioned is really a shame, because I would argue you cannot fully
I agree, 100%. And the more I've started reading the Old Testament, it is like, wow, everything I've read in the New Testament is right here. And you can't understand it unless you know the wording of the Old Testament.
Yeah, for example, a lot of people don't realize it, but Jesus just doesn't show up in the New Testament.
That's right.
He's all through the Old Testament.
All through the Bible. He was in the desert with them, in the wilderness, you know. He was there in the beginning, in the creation, because all things were created by him and for him. In John chapter 1. Okay. So what the psalmist is doing here basically is he's renouncing the ways of the world. He's saying, I'm not going to live that way anymore. So my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. And this is what we've already said. Heart being lifted up is the same as being haughty, prideful, being arrogant. So he's saying he has stopped that. He decided to stop doing that. Eyes raised too high has to do with wanting to control things, reaching for things, being ambitious, being, it's like the Nimrod, Tower of Babel, however you want to say it. You know, they wanted to build them a tower to reach to heaven, to reach to God. It was something they wanted to do. They were going against God's way of life. They were supposed to disperse and populate the world. Yes.
An easy way to understand that is what the opposite of that would be shame. And those that are shamed, or their eyes are always down. They're looking down.
Right.
They can't even look the other person in the eyes because they feel so guilt and shame.
Right. It has to do with guilt, exactly. And it also has to do with making yourself nothing as Jesus did, being a servant. It's sort of two different things there, but they both have to do with the downcast eyes, you know. Having downcast eyes is not being proud, not being thinking too highly of oneself. But in context of a lot of our passages, it has more to do with the servanthood of like Jesus. He came to not to be served, but to serve, and he made himself nothing. And he ministered to the lowly and the downcast, those that were shameful, those who were guilty, those who needed a physician to heal them, you know. Those that are haughty have the heart lifted high and the upcast eyes, trying to control and be leaders. And Jesus says, you're not like the leaders of this world. They lord over people. It's basically leading by example and in humility and counting others greater than ourselves, or the needs of others being more important than our own. That's the kind of servanthood that Jesus portrayed and talked about. So this is where the psalmist is going. He is, even though David was the king, he understood that that it was the kings and the rulers that lorded over people, and his heart is changing. He was known as a friend of God because he had the heart that God wanted him to have. Didn't mean he didn't do things that were bad, like murder and adultery and everything else. But he understood and changed his attitude when he repented and confessed to God. Okay, so I do not occupy myself or my mind with things too great and marvelous for me. Okay, this piece of scripture here, if the Lord delights, he will bring us into this land. This is one of the times in Numbers when that reflects this attitude. And this was said by Joshua and Caleb after coming back from, spying out the land across the Jordan. And the other spies that went over said, "We can't do this. There are giants over there," But God said he would give it to them. So Joshua says, if the Lord delights, or your version may say delights in us, then he will bring us into this land. So he is being submissive. He's being trusting in God. And consequently, Caleb and Joshua were the only two of the number that actually got to go into the land because of this attitude, of this trust in God and believing in him. And everyone else wandered the desert for 40 years until the whole generation died off. Remember? So this is where we see in Numbers that attitude. Okay. So the psalmist brought his ego under control, basically. He said he's not lifting his heart up. He's not raising his eyes too high, trying to control everything and grasp everything. And he's not spending all of his thoughts on things that he cannot control. Let's look at a few other passages here. Okay. Psalmist says his heart is not lifted up. Of course, we read about the being arrogant and prideful and all this and haughty in Romans 12:3. Jump over there just a minute. Did I put down the wrong passage? No. It says, "For by the grace given to me," Paul speaking here, not to think of "For by the grace given to me, I say to every one among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned him or given to him." So we see here Paul talking about not being arrogant and that kind of thing. Verse 16, also, I have these written down. I did not write the verse out, but we're supposed to live in harmony with one another. Verse 16 there. Yeah, there it is. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. This is the attitude that the psalmist has finally taken. And let's see. There was chapter 11. Let's go back to chapter, whoops. Can't do that, can I? Chapter 11, verse 20. Talks about, so do not become proud. Whoops. Not to become proud. But this goes back to what I'm talking about earlier, that everything we read in the New Testament is talked about in the Old Testament. And this is what Jesus fulfilled. He came in this spirit that's being described here. So let's go over to verse 2. I have calmed and quieted my soul. Again, this is something that he consciously, purposely did. We can calm and quiet our soul. The inner striving of life it's been replaced with this rest. It's a peace, maturity. It's trust. All this inner striving has been replaced with trust in God and relying on Him to give us what we need in life. And it's a state of rest that we have within us. In Matthew 18, now when it talks about, let me go on down here. And if you remember through the Psalms of Ascent so far, every time there is a crisis, they're saying, Lord, give me this. The last one was, destroy all of my external enemies. Remember in chapter 129. Please make them like grass on a rooftop, where the sun comes up and it just kills it all. So he's saying, get rid of my enemies. But he's changed from that, from demanding things from God to resting in that relationship. Have you ever been around someone, and hopefully if you're married you have, you don't have to need anything, and you don't have to talk, and you don't have to come up with things. It's enough just to be with them. Companionable silence. That is really good, Adam. I like the way you put that. Companionable silence. It's rest. It's just enough to be there. And that's the way the psalmist is with God at this point. Not demanding, not like when it talks about the weaned child, it's not talking about an infant that's crying and screaming because of discomfort and being hungry. It's talking about a child that has reached a level of maturity that they can begin eating solid food, okay? They understand what's right and wrong, and they can take instruction, but they're still a child, and they're still sitting on mama's lap. And that's where the comfort is, because that child trusts in the mother. This is the imagery that's being used. So this is a weaned child. it shows a level of maturity, but it's still an innocence of total dependence and trust in the mother. And that's where the comfort is, just to be there with the mother. So, did I run ahead? Okay, I guess I didn't put another chart in there for this. But this is trusting without needing anything. It's just enough to be there. How did you say that again, Adam? That companionable silence. And that's just what is depicted here, that rest. And I'm going to write that down before I forget it again.
Yeah, I didn't invent that. It's a concept that I've heard before. People talking about like good friends or married couples who've been around for a long time have this, the idea that it's enough just to be in the same room.
Yes.
That you can see each other is there, and you can enjoy whatever you're doing without needing to say anything.
Right. Just enough to be there in the same room, enjoy one another's company. And that's the way it should be between God and us, or us and God. You know, that same feeling of rest and peace and comfort, and not always just going there because you want something. You know, that's where we get into trouble. Okay. Resting in the relationship with God. I wanted to I'd hope to get to Numbers more, but we see this in Moses as well, in Numbers 12 and verse 3, where it talks about, now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And Moses, you know, is not trying to defend himself. This sets in the face of the rebellion that Miriam and Aaron had, where they call Moses aside. And they're saying, why are you lifting yourself up over all of the rest of us? Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 through 10 tells this story, if you want to go over there. But he does not react to their accusations. And this statement is made about Moses, that his heart, he was very meek, more than all the people who were upon the face of the earth. I'll run over there to Numbers 12. See, this is where Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of a Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman, Moses had. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. And now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meetings. They got called upon the carpet. You know. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And when the cloud was removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous. So, what takes place here is, I'll go on and read verse 11. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of the mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, God, please heal her, please. Even though these accusations were made against Moses, he was still looking out for their best interest and asking God to have mercy on them. If her father, excuse me, but long story short, excuse me, so long story short, Miriam had to go through this same process